The late summer of 1886 had turned the Montana Territory into a landscape of unforgiving ochre and dust. The sun, a brutal brass disk, had baked the plains until the dried grass cracked underfoot like spun sugar. Every breath tasted of red silt, cow grease, and the metallic tang of railroad rust that clung to the air near the small, determined settlement of Last Chance. Eliza Hart braced herself against the stagecoach window, her hand shielding her face from the worst of the wind-blown grit. At 24, she had packed the modest possessions of her past life in Missouri into a single trunk, leaving behind the suffocating pressure of a dead father's debts and the relentless social expectation that she must marry quickly and safely. Her father, a blacksmith of deep thought and poor business sense, had left her little but a sturdy education, a love for literature, and the belief that a well-organized mind was its own kind of security. Her goal was stark and singular: to find stable employment, earn her own keep, and decide the course of her own life without obligation to any man or ledger save her own. She was dressed neatly but plainly, her travel clothes chosen for resilience rather than style. She knew she looked like a woman who had spent too much time indoors reading, and not enough time learning to negotiate the rough edges of the world. But her composure, she believed, was her shield. She clutched a worn envelope containing her ticket to independence, a letter offering her the position of bookkeeper at the general store in Last Chance. The stagecoach, driven hard and fast, hit a washout in a dry creek bed that might once have been Bear Creek, but was now nothing more than a shallow, treacherous mess of cracked stone. The impact was violent, a sudden, terrible lurch. The coach tilted, metal screeched against rock, and then it rolled onto its side with a sickening crunch of broken wood and frantic human cries. Eliza was thrown, but instead of panicking, her mind snapped instantly into the calm, assessing mode she'd practiced while reading her worn copies of folk medicine and anatomy books. Though shaken, she was whole. A man near her had a nasty gash above his eye. Another passenger, an older woman, was weeping, holding her forearm at an unnatural angle. It was in this chaos that Cole McKenna appeared. He rode out of the shimmering heat haze, a silent, economical figure on a dark, powerful quarter horse. At 33, Cole was built like the dry landscape itself, lean, tough, and giving nothing away. He owned the McKenna Ranch, a decent operation that had been gutted by the brutal winter 2 years prior, losing nearly half its stock. His life was currently devoted to a stark, triple objective: keep the land, uphold the integrity of the McKenna name, and retain the few loyal hands who hadn't drifted to richer pastures. He dismounted, tying his reins with a practiced speed that spoke of a man who measured his life in practical actions. He didn't rush or shout. His voice, when he finally spoke, was low and held the slight rasp of dust and long silence. "Everyone step away from the wreckage, please. We'll check for fire." While Cole and his lone ranch hand, a wiry man named Jess, began the heavy work of riding the coach and calming the draft horses. Eliza knelt beside the weeping woman. "Let me look at that, ma'am," Eliza said, her voice surprisingly steady, though her heart hammered against her ribs. The injury was clearly a compound fracture. Eliza did not possess the strength or training to set it, but she knew how to stabilize it. From her satchel, she produced a clean linen kerchief, a small bottle of whiskey she had carried for medicinal use, and 2 thin, smooth pieces of wood that she'd used as bookmarkers. "This is going to hurt," she warned gently. She cleaned the wound as best she could with the whiskey, earning a gasp from the woman, and then, using her scarf, she bound the splints firmly against the arm, minimizing movement. She then turned her attention to the man with the bleeding head, applying pressure and a sterile bandage ripped from her own petticoat hem. Cole paused his work, his gaze catching the scene. He was accustomed to the dramatic panic that followed an accident, or the rough, immediate application of a torn shirt or dirty belt. He watched Eliza. He watched the deliberate way her hands worked, the calm authority in her eyes as she issued instructions. "Bite down on this. Do not move this arm. She was neither a nurse nor a doctor, yet she possessed the rare gift of effective action in a crisis. Applying practical wisdom gleaned from her books, she was entirely self-possessed, a quality Cole valued above almost all others. When the immediate triage was done, and the most injured were settled back in the now upright coach, Eliza finally took a deep, shaking breath. Cole approached her, his boots crunching on the dry stones. "You handled that well," he said, his praise delivered flatly, as a statement of fact, not flattery. "I read a lot of books on simple home remedies," Eliza admitted, rubbing the dust from her forehead. "I figured if I ever got far enough from civilization, I might need the knowledge more than a calling card." Cole gave the faintest incline of his head. "We'll get you into Last Chance. It's just past that rise." The remaining ride was slow, uncomfortable, and silent. Last Chance was less a town and more a stubborn collection of wooden boxes clustered near the railroad tracks, a few stores, a blacksmith, a church, a bank, and a saloon. It smelled harsher than the plain, the pungent odors of tanning hides, stale beer, and engine smoke mixing with the pervasive dust. Eliza thanked Cole for the lift, straightening her skirt and smoothing her hair. She clutched the letter of employment tightly and headed for O'Malley's General Store, a two-story building that served as the heart of commerce. Old Man O'Malley, a thin man with a perpetually flour-dusted apron, looked at Eliza, then at the envelope she handed him. He fumbled with his spectacles and slowly unfolded the letter, then sighed a sound that spoke of paperwork and regret. "Miss Hart, Eliza Hart, from Missouri," he murmured. "I remember writing this. That was 3 weeks ago. Miss, before the rail line had a washout up north." Eliza's chest tightened. "Is there a problem, Mr. O'Malley?" "The problem is the telegraph. Miss, it's slow, and a desperate man moves fast. My nephew's wife, Agnes, arrived last week. She's already settled into the back room, and her ledger work is adequate. She's family, see. I'm afraid I can't keep you on. Not after she traveled all this way." He tapped the letter sadly. "Your journey was too long. Miss, the job is filled." The floor of the general store, scattered with spilled oats and sawdust, suddenly felt unstable beneath Eliza's worn boots. The certainty she had carried for weeks, the certainty of that bookkeeping job, that small salary, that foothold in a new world had just dissolved into the Montana dust. She was standing in the middle of a strange town, alone, unattached, and now, officially, unemployed. The letter of self-determination she had written for herself had been superseded by a nepotistic telegraph. Eliza managed a calm nod, thanked O'Malley for his time, and walked out into the relentless afternoon sun. Her composure, so useful at the accident site, now felt like a fragile shell over a growing panic. She found a quiet corner in the rear of May Thompson's saloon and boarding house, ordering only coffee and a slice of dry cornbread. May Thompson, the proprietor, was a woman whose face was worn smooth by hard living and observation, but whose eyes still held a keen, good-natured intelligence. The saloon was functional, a place for ranch hands to drink, not a den of iniquity. But the atmosphere was thick with the immediate, judgmental assessment that marked any frontier community. It wasn't long before Eliza felt the weight of that assessment. A group of men and one woman were clustered near the bar, their conversation too loud and too deliberate to be entirely private. "See that one," a man with a wide, red neck muttered, tipping his hat toward Eliza. "Fancy clothes, fancy manners. Must be a mail-order bride gone wrong. No man to claim her, no kin to vouch. They're trouble, those unattached ones." The woman beside him agreed, her voice tight with the local proprietorship. "Too much education, read too many books. They think they're better than a good ranch wife." Eliza kept her eyes on her coffee, but the words were sharp, familiar hooks. It was the same relentless judgment she had fled in Missouri. A woman's worth was determined by her marital status or the strength of her male relative's name. In Last Chance, An unattached woman was a commodity that had failed to sell, or worse, a potential liability to the social order. Then, the mood shifted. A man entered the saloon, filling the doorway. He was large and loud, with a heavy gold watch chain stretched across his vest. This was Silas Crowell, owner of the immense Bar C Ranch, the biggest spread in the valley. His influence stretched far beyond his fences, and his men, known locally by the ominous moniker Black Spur, due to the brand on their gear, were known for their rough methods and adherence to Silas's often aggressive interpretation of frontier law. Silas Crowell was talking, his voice booming over the low din. "McKenna's land is drying up," he declared to the bartender, loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Cole McKenna is stubborn, says the water rights are his under the 71 Charter. Fool, the water goes where the good Lord sends it, and right now, the Lord is sending it through my new diversion ditch." The talk was about Bear Creek, the crucial subterranean stream that fed the limited spring on Cole McKenna's ranch. Silas was clearly making a public claim, signaling his intention to seize or control the water, thereby rendering Cole's land useless and forcing him to sell. It was a cold, brutal game of land tenure and water rights, the only law that truly mattered in the arid West. Eliza felt a flicker of anger for Cole, the man who had helped her earlier, now clearly under attack. She noted the name, Silas Crowell, a predator in a landscape already unforgiving. Just as Silas was reaching the height of his public complaint, the swinging doors opened again, and Cole McKenna stepped in, looking even more severe in the low light of the saloon than he had under the sun. He walked straight to the bar, not looking at Silas, but the silence he brought with him was louder than Silas's bragging. Silas, however, thrived on confrontation. "Well, look who the wind blew in. McKenna, I was just telling the fine folk here how your cattle are going to need to learn to drink sand, friend." Cole ordered a beer, his voice flat. "My cattle are fine. Silas, you worry about your own fences. I hear the coyotes have been busy on your north line." The threat was clear. Cole knew Silas had been aggressive. Silas leaned in, his smile sharp. "You'll sell eventually. Cole, that little creek of yours is worth more to the railroad than it is to you. Save yourself the trouble. I'll give you a fair price." "It's not for sale," Cole said, picking up his beer. He did not look at Eliza, but he moved toward the table where she was sitting. He stopped, hovering awkwardly. He was a man accustomed to issuing orders to livestock and men, not conducting social interactions with women. "Miss Hart," he said, using her name for the first time. "Still no word from O'Malley?" Eliza swallowed her cold coffee. "He hired someone else. Mr. McKenna. I arrived too late." Cole looked at her, then back at the door, calculating. He saw Silas Crowell watching them both, an ugly smirk on his face, enjoying the sight of the stubborn rancher talking to the unclaimed woman. Cole needed a bookkeeper badly. His finances were a mess from the winter loss, and he needed a clear accounting if he was going to fight Silas over the water claims. He spoke low, his eyes scanning the room, making sure no one could misunderstand his intentions. "I need a hand, not for the ranch work. Mostly, I need someone to manage the ledger, my debts, the salt shipments, the wire. I need clear writing and a clear mind. You have both." He paused, then added the necessity that had brought him to town in the first place. "And my neighbor's woman. She needs someone to watch her young children a few afternoons a week while she rests." Eliza stared at him, relief warring with deep pride. It was a bizarre, piecemeal job, bookkeeper, occasional nanny, and whatever kitchen duties came with room and board. It was a lifeline, but it was also total reliance on a stranger. "I can keep books, Mr. McKenna," she said firmly, "and I can certainly mind children, but I must be clear I am not a servant. I will work for clear wages." "Wages are clear," Cole confirmed. $15 a month, room and board. You'll have a small room off the kitchen. Temporary, Miss Hart, 30-day trial. If you don't like it, you can leave. If I don't like your bookkeeping, you can leave. We operate by contract, not by sentiment. And the kitchen duties? Eliza asked, needing to know the full extent of the compromise. Simple fare, but... Cole hesitated, looking genuinely troubled for the first time. He ran a hand over his short, dusty hair. There's a cow. We keep a milk cow for the house. Can you milk a cow? Eliza was a daughter of a blacksmith. Her hands knew the difference between a hammer and a wrench, a clean sheet of paper and a blotter. They did not know a cow's udder. She looked directly into Cole's intense, blue eyes and decided that honesty was the only currency she had left. Mr. McKenna, she said, managing a dry smile. I can read the poetry of Walt Whitman. I can translate medical terms from Latin. I know the principles of double-entry accounting, but I can tell you truthfully, I am a complete novice in the dairy arts. Cole's mouth twitched, a fleeting expression that might have been amusement. It was the first sign of anything resembling humor or lightness she had seen in the man. So, he said, his voice flat once more, you're good with books, useless with beasts. I read a lot of books, Eliza countered wryly. But the cow, I suspect, hasn't read them. It might be a mismatch. A mismatch, Cole repeated, shaking his head slightly. Well, Miss Hart, necessity makes strange bedfellows and stranger ranch hands. I need the bookkeeper more than I need the milk hand. The contract stands. You can start tonight. He turned to leave, then paused, looking back at her. We leave in an hour. Bring only what you need tonight. We'll fetch the trunk tomorrow. And don't talk to Silas Crowell. He only talks in traps. Eliza nodded, gathering her few items. The seed of conflict was sown immediately. She was an island of intellect and order dropped into a sea of brutal, physical reality, paired with a man as hard and unyielding as the land he fought to keep. The vaunted bookkeeping skills were useful, but the practical ignorance, the inability to perform basic ranch survival tasks like milking or mending, was a glaring vulnerability. As she stood, Silas Crowell, still lingering at the bar, caught her eye and smirked, a look that stripped her of her dignity and labeled her instantly as the unclaimed woman who had settled for the desperate rancher. Enjoy the dust, little bookworm. Silas called out, loud enough for Cole to hear. That Bear Creek water is getting mighty low. McKenna's ranch is a sinking ship. Eliza ignored him, her chin held high. Sinking ship or not, it was a ship. And for the first time in weeks, she had a berth. Outside, the sun was beginning its slow, crimson descent, casting long, stark shadows across the valley. The wind, which had been a hot, dusty nuisance, now had a cold edge to it, whispering of the harsh realities that lay ahead. Cole was saddling her a gentle riding horse, his movements precise. Mr. McKenna, she said, approaching him. Tell me about this Silas Crowell. Cole tightened the cinch, his face unreadable. Silas wants what I have. The water, he's pushing for a public claim on Bear Creek. Says my usage is illegal under a technicality. He's not a good man. Miss Hart, he thinks the law is something he can buy or beat out of someone. You stick to the books. I'll handle the snakes. He offered her a hand up into the saddle. As she took it, Eliza felt the calluses on his palm, the true mark of the West. It was the first physical contact, a simple, necessary action that bound them together by a strange, temporary contract. As they rode out of Last Chance, following the rutted track toward the McKenna Ranch, Eliza watched the town shrink behind them, the red dust of the trail mixed with the evening air, smelling of earth and effort. Her destination felt like a precarious fortress under siege, threatened not just by the ambitious greed of men like Silas Crowell and his Black Spur gang, but by the relentless, drying nature of the land itself. She had fled one kind of debt in Missouri, only to ride straight toward another in Montana, a debt of necessity to a taciturn man, in exchange for a temporary place on a land that fought back. The journey had begun, founded on a simple truth: she knew how to read books. But survival in this new world required her to learn to read the signs of the earth and the signs of the man riding silently beside her. She had a lot to learn, and the clock was ticking. The McKenna ranch house was simple and solid, built low to the ground to shrug off the high winds. Eliza was given a small, spare room off the kitchen. It smelled faintly of wood smoke, dried herbs, and the honest scent of a clean but much-used blanket. The first full day brought the inciting incident that solidified her sudden employment. Cole, after a silent breakfast of cornmeal mush, laid out his dilemma not with complaint, but with dry, factual precision. He spread a sheaf of papers on the kitchen table, documents yellowed and brittle with age, tied with fraying twine. Bear Creek, he stated. Tapping the topmost deed, dated 1871, the water flows underground through my land before it surfaces in the communal meadow. This deed gives me priority right to the flow, enough for my cattle and household. Eliza examined the documents. She saw immediately what Cole meant about clear writing. The original script was beautiful, but the surveyor's markings for the water boundary were infuriatingly vague. The creek's path was marked by a mossy stone that had long since been buried by sediment and a double cottonwood that had likely been felled in the last great blizzard. The legal description relied too heavily on transient natural landmarks. It's relying on interpretation, Eliza noted, running a fingertip over the faded ink. An interpretation favors the one with the loudest voice and the deepest pockets. Silas Crowell, Cole confirmed, leaning back against the counter. He crossed his arms, his posture one of controlled watchfulness. He's organized a town meeting today at the church. Says he wants to divide the resource fairly. What he means is, he'll claim the stream has shifted course, fence off the surfacing point, and choke my spring. This was the crisis point, the event that demanded Cole's full attention and therefore justified Eliza's presence. My job is to find a counter-argument in this paperwork. Then, Eliza said, accepting the challenge. She was an outsider, but the documents offered her familiar territory, a legal boundary, not a landmark. That and the accounts, Cole instructed. I need to know exactly what I owe, to whom, and when. I have 30 days to secure a bank loan to get through winter. They won't even look at me unless the books are straight. If Silas cuts the water, the bank will call the loan anyway. Eliza nodded. The gravity of the commitment settled on her. She was not just auditing debts for feed, salt, and barbed wire. She was fighting for the solvency and survival of this small, besieged ranch. And she owed Cole a debt of her own, the unspoken gratitude for the ride and the chance, and the quiet defense against Silas Crowell in the saloon. Mr. McKenna, consider my 30-day trial official, Eliza said, looking up from the spread of papers. I will make those ledgers sing. I will track every pound of feed and every foot of wire. And I will find something in this paper to protect your claim. It was her initial, desperate contract, transformed into a personal commitment. She was staking her own self-respect against the fear of failure. She had fled Missouri to avoid dependency, and here she was, dependent on a single man's ranch in the middle of Montana. Yet, this reliance was on her own terms, an agreement of mutual service, and that difference was everything. Cole simply nodded once, a gesture that meant more than any verbal thanks. He placed a heavy iron key on the table, the key to the ranch's main supply shed, where the good wire, the emergency salt, and the rifle ammunition were stored. Keep this, he said, and this. He slid the ranch's main ledger across the table, a thick canvas-bound volume that contained the financial secrets and the history of the McKenna family. It was an extraordinary act of trust, for a man who lived by principles and fought for his name. Handing over the core documents and the key to his supplies to a woman he had known for less than 24 hours was a profound admission of need and faith. Cole's internal conflict was a vast, silent valley in his character. He was a man who had built walls since 1882, the year his wife, Alice, left. Alice hadn't run off with another man, but with a traveling circus, trading the predictable hardship of ranch life for the unpredictable glamour of the spotlight. She left a note, short and polite, claiming the wide spaces had felt too narrow for her ambition. The betrayal wasn't in the infidelity, but in the calculated abandonment. It left Cole with a fear not of being wronged, but of allowing himself to attach to someone who would inevitably leave for a brighter horizon. Eliza, with her quiet intelligence and her library of books, felt worryingly similar to someone who might one day find the West too small for her expansive mind. But today, he needed the bookkeeper, and the bookkeeper was here. Cole left for last chance, riding hard to intercept Silas Crowell's meeting. Eliza, now the sole adult authority on the ranch, spent the morning putting her section of the bargain into effect. This meant dealing with the cow. The ranch kept one ornery, middle-aged Jersey named Daisy, who seemed to view human interaction as a personal affront. Eliza approached the milk stall with the cautious optimism of a scholar confronting a difficult text. She remembered Cole's instruction. The teat is not a handle. It's a pump. Squeeze and pull, but mostly squeeze. Quickly. She positioned the metal bucket, adjusted the three-legged stool, and took a deep breath. She reached out. Daisy immediately shifted her massive weight, delivering a swift, surprising kick that sent the wooden stool spinning and the empty bucket clattering against the wall. Eliza dodged, narrowly avoiding a painful bruise. Just then, a small, freckled boy appeared in the barn doorway, carrying a wooden tray of oats. This was Toby, the neighbor's boy who helped Cole with the horses and chores. Perhaps 10 years old, skinny and sharp-eyed. Toby was quiet, an orphan who had been unofficially adopted by the surrounding ranching community, and currently lodged at the Thompson Ranch down the road. Toby stared at the fallen stool, then at Eliza, then at the placidly chewing cow. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. "Daisy is particular," he offered softly. "Particular," Eliza repeated, dusting off her hands. "She seems to believe the milk is a private matter. I suspect she is an individualist." Toby giggled, a surprising, high sound. "Mr. McKenna says she's just contrary. He says you gotta treat her like she's a steam engine." Eliza decided to try the analogy. She approached Daisy again, speaking to her as if she were a complicated piece of machinery. "All right, Daisy, let's synchronize our pistons. I need to regulate the pressure for maximum output. We are aiming for efficiency, not velocity." Daisy, unimpressed by the mechanical vocabulary, swung her head and let out a loud, wet snort as Eliza made her next timid attempt at milking. The cow deliberately lifted her tail and swatted Eliza across the cheek with a filthy, bristly flourish. Eliza stepped back, wiping her face with a gasp. It was then that Cole returned early from the town meeting, walked into the barn, dust still clinging to his leather coat. He had clearly seen the tail strike. He stood in the gloom, watching the spectacle the educated woman, covered in a stripe of manure, arguing politely with a cow. A small, genuine sound of suppressed laughter escaped him. It was a dry, rusty sound, but unmistakably amusement. "Miss Hart," he said, his voice husky with effort, "you look like you lost a debate." "I believe I have. Mr. McKenna," Eliza admitted, holding her dignity with difficulty. "I was attempting to conceptualize her as a steam engine, as young Toby suggested. I neglected to factor in the external cooling apparatus." Cole stepped forward, removing his hat and slapping the dust off his coat. He walked to the cow, and without fuss or wasted movement, he reached out, stroked Daisy's flank once, then settled the stool back in place. "You're right. Toby," Cole said, not to Eliza, but to the boy. "But she's not the piston. She's the boiler. And you stand here." He pointed to a spot well behind the cow's hip. He looked at Eliza, his face now serious. "You're treating her like a book, Miss Hart. You're being too gentle, too cerebral. You need to be firm, not cruel, but firm. Daisy only respects power that she can't argue with. You have to convince her that this is going to happen, quickly and efficiently." He took the empty bucket. "Imagine," Cole said, the absurdity of the metaphor striking him again, that the cow is just a very sensitive, very cranky hydraulic press. Don't stand in front of the piston, or you get crushed. Don't stand under the vent, or you get sprayed. Get in, do the work, and get out. He demonstrated, and the milk flowed in a clean, rhythmic jet, the sound of liquid hitting the metal bucket a comforting, efficient noise. The moment of instruction was a miniature collision of their two worlds, full of that light humor that breaks the tension of necessity. Eliza, the woman of intellect, learned that survival required a different kind of strength, one rooted in applied reality. Cole, the man of reality, learned that he could find amusement in the failure of her bookish approach. Cole's meeting in Last Chance had, predictably, gone badly. Silas had orchestrated a loud, well-attended assembly, leveraging community fear of drought to propose a shared town-controlled canal that would effectively divert Bear Creek's surface water far below the McKenna Spring. He had his men there, the Black Spur hands, nodding on cue. Cole reported later that evening, while Eliza was painstakingly reviewing the ledgers by lamplight. And May Thompson was there, bless her heart. She tried to stick up for me, asking Silas how much the railroad was paying him for the land the canal would run through. That shut him up for a minute. May Thompson, the saloon owner, was a fixture of Last Chance, a source of fierce loyalty and sharp common sense, along with the quiet, kindly Father O'Rourke, the local priest. They formed the fragile social conscience of the town, offering a contrast to the casual ruthlessness of Silas Crowell. Eliza quickly understood that these three supporting characters, May, Father O'Rourke, and young Toby, represented the essential goodness and community memory that Cole was fighting to preserve. Eliza spent the next few days immersed in the ranch's books. The accounting was appalling. Cole was meticulous in the ranch work, but reckless in the paperwork. He had signed notes for feed and salt from 4 different suppliers, keeping track of it all with hurried pencil marks on scraps of paper. He had been so focused on rebuilding his herd after the hard winter that he had ignored the financial erosion. Her conflict, the fight between self-respect and the terror of failure, eased as she found purpose in the work. The neat columns of figures were her battleground. She realized that her independence wouldn't come from a job in a sterile store, but from demonstrating her value in this harsh, real environment. The very act of imposing order on Cole's chaotic finances made her feel less alone. Cole, meanwhile, wrestled with his own fears. He saw Eliza working late, her brow furrowed in concentration, and the image of his former wife, Alice, bent over her own books, planning her escape route, kept creeping into his mind. He kept his distance, speaking only of business, never personal matters. He was afraid of forming an attachment, afraid of the inevitable day when her books, her letters, or her superior mind told her that this ranch, this life, this solitary man, was not enough. The danger from the environment was growing as well. Cole heard reports from the edge of the foothills a major dust storm was brewing, and the recent dry heat was pushing a dangerous pack of timber wolves closer to the settled valleys, drawn by the scent of weak or isolated cattle. The ranch was desperately short of hands, making both the defense against nature and the threat of Silas Crowell doubly difficult. And Silas was not waiting for the law. 2 nights after the town meeting, Cole's small, new herd of feeder calves was restless. At dawn, Jess, the hired man, discovered a section of the new barbed wire fence on the north boundary had been cut. Not pulled. It was a clean, deliberate sabotage. The calves, confused but unharmed, had begun to wander toward the communal meadow, precisely where Silas's men were waiting. The tracks left in the soft earth were meant to confuse. They were the hoof prints of an unmarked, small group of horses, but the boot prints nearby were left with the heel spikes pointed backwards, suggesting a deliberate attempt to lead anyone following to believe the culprits had ridden toward the McKenna ranch, not away from it. "Silas," Cole said, his jaw tight. "He wants to plant the idea that I'm the one running cattle on communal land. He's building a case of bad faith." Eliza stepped out of the kitchen, having heard the raised voices. She was holding the main ledger, now neatly wrapped in oilcloth to protect it from dust. "Mr. McKenna," she said, looking at the tracks. "The key you gave me. I inventoried the spare rolls of barbed wire. I know where every foot of it went. I need to make a note of this sabotage, a police report. Perhaps." "The local sheriff is Silas's cousin by marriage," Cole said bitterly. "It'll be filed and forgotten." "Then we will file it anyway," Eliza insisted. "And we will log the time and cost to repair the fence. Every action Silas takes. We will meet with a counteraction in the ledger. We will make our paper evidence stronger than his word. We will document his aggression." Her insistence on documentation, on fighting the lawless acts with the lawful precision of the bookkeeper, was a new, unexpected kind of courage. Cole looked at the woman who could not milk a cow, the woman whose books felt more real than the earth beneath his feet, and saw his advantage. He saw the potential for a meticulous defense. That evening, when the last chore was done, Cole performed his silent, daily ritual. He placed a heavy, white-enameled porcelain cup chipped at the rim, but clean on the small sill outside the kitchen door, right where the sun would catch it in the morning. He filled it with coffee, lukewarm and heavily diluted with water to stretch the grounds. It was a small, practical gesture of care, delivered without a word. The cup was for Eliza. He didn't want to wake her, and he didn't want to ask her to drink with him. It was a clear, unspoken message. You are here, you are working, and I am looking out for you. Eliza found it every morning, still warm enough to steam slightly in the cool Montana dawn. It was the antithesis of the harsh, transactional world around her. This chipped enamel cup, filled with weak coffee, became the silent bond of their tentative trust, a commitment made not in words or deeds, but in the small, repeated act of care, defying the vast and lonely silence of the plains. She picked it up, took a sip, and opened the ledger, ready to face Silas Crowell with the power of numbers. The next 2 weeks settled into a hard, rhythmic existence on the McKenna ranch. Eliza found that the true work of survival was a constant education, far more demanding than any university text. Cole, respecting their contract, not sentiment arrangement, treated her apprenticeship in ranch life with the serious, humorless attention of a drill sergeant. But his instruction was always rooted in practical necessity. He taught her the diamond knot for roping a post, a crucial step before she could dream of roping a calf. He showed her how to read the faint watermarks on the high clay banks, a way to gauge the health of the underground Bear Creek even now, during the long drought. You learn to read the earth the same way you read a balance sheet. "Miss Hart," he stated one morning, his eyes narrowed against the sun. "By observing what's missing, she learned the simple, immediate pleasure of mending, a task far removed from the cold arithmetic of the ledger. Cole found her old riding saddle, which had begun to crack where the stirrup leather attached. The leather was dry and brittle, split by time and weather, a perfect metaphor for Cole's own fragile trust. He showed her how to take a needle, a heavy, curved one, and thread it with waxed cord, explaining the complex yet forgiving pattern of a saddle stitch. The work was slow, requiring brute force to push the needle through the old hide. One afternoon, Cole returned from mending a fence line and watched Eliza struggling to push a heavy, worn wooden bucket full of water, the single vessel they used for the house cow, to the stall. The thick wooden handle was too wide for her hands, and the grain was splintered and rough. Without a word, Cole disappeared into the barn. He returned 10 minutes later, smelling of wood shavings and sweat. He presented her with the bucket, its handle now thinner, sanded smooth, and perfectly rounded. He had whittled away the excess wood, making the grip a comfortable fit for her smaller, more delicate hands. "Easier on the tendons," he explained, avoiding her eyes. "Friction is wasted energy. We don't waste anything here. Miss Hart." Eliza understood it as another one of his silent acts of consideration, equal in meaning to the chipped enamel cup of coffee that greeted her every dawn. Their exchanges were marked by a subtle, growing proximity and light humor. Cole was trying to teach her basic stock handling, beginning inevitably, with Daisy, the cow. Eliza, still flummoxed by the animal's stubborn defiance, resorted to the only tools she knew, words and rhythm. One overcast morning, attempting to coax Daisy to stand still while Toby brushed her flank. Eliza began to read aloud from a small, battered volume of verse she kept in her apron pocket. She recited Walt Whitman's expansive lines, her voice clear and resonant, filling the dusty barn with the sound of civilization and soaring philosophy. Daisy merely blinked, chewed her cud loudly, and then, mid-stanza, began to shuffle her feet, nearly stepping on the bucket. Cole leaned against the stall partition, his arms crossed over his chest, his mouth a rigid, straight line that was clearly restraining a powerful surge of laughter. When Eliza finished the poem with a dramatic flourish, Cole finally spoke, his voice dry as the hay dust. "Well, Miss Hart, that was certainly poetic. Did you notice the results?" "I noticed the results." Eliza sighed, defeated. "The results are that Daisy prefers to treat the Song of Myself as an invitation to move her massive self elsewhere. In this county, Miss Hart," Cole said, finally letting a genuine, fleeting smile crease the corners of his eyes, "cows like oats better than poetry. And they prefer a firm hand to a metaphor. Try rubbing behind her ears and offer her a handful of cornmeal. That's the only literature she understands." Despite the growing familiarity on the ranch, the outside world pressed in with hostility. Eliza had secured the McKenna ledger, imposing a rigorous system on the debts. She noticed that Cole was the only local rancher who still dealt fairly with the nomadic Crow sheep herders, trading salt blocks and wire for wool and labor, where others refused, citing prejudice and land disputes. Eliza was careful to log these transactions with scrupulous fairness, ensuring the pricing was just this ethical choice. Cole's refusal to participate in the widespread community bigotry marked him in her mind as a man of true honor, strengthening her resolve to protect his land. But the tension was rising. One of Cole's satellite waterholes, a crucial backup spring 3 miles from the main ranch, dried up completely, a victim of the prolonged heat and likely Silas Crowell's aggressive water management upstream. This meant the cattle had to be driven much further, increasing the risk of rustlers or worse, an attack by the black spur hands who would gladly steal the cattle and pin the blame on anyone else. Eliza found a moment to visit May Thompson at the saloon, ostensibly to buy supplies, but truly seeking counsel. May was slicing bread behind the counter, her expression tired. "Cole is lucky to have your mind, Eliza," May said, without looking up. "But you watch yourself. Good men are rare, but land and water are rarer still. You get involved in this fight, and you pick a side. Silas Crowell plays rough. Don't fall for the romance of the ranch. Child, this is Montana. It doesn't love anyone back." The warning struck a chord with Eliza's own internal caution. She was there to be independent, yet she was becoming inextricably linked to Cole's struggle. The pressure intensified when Eliza received a heavy, wax-sealed letter from Missouri. The return address was her late father's cousin, a stern, distant relative. The letter was blunt, devoid of affection, and entirely contractual due to the accumulating debt. Her only option to secure her family name's solvency was to return and accept the proposal of marriage from a distant, wealthy landholder in their county, a man she barely knew. The letter confirmed her worst fears and solidified her decision to run. The debt was the chain, and marriage was the prison. Here, even amidst the dust and danger, she was free. This external threat, the ghost of her past trying to reclaim her, focused her resolve to succeed on the ranch. One blustery evening, a small act of tenderness occurred. Cole returned to the porch, his oilskin slicker torn at the shoulder, soaked from a sudden, sharp local downpour. Eliza, sitting inside with her ledgers, noticed the ripped lining. Later, after he was asleep, she took the slicker into her small room. She was a meticulous seamstress, having had to maintain her own wardrobe since childhood. But the heavy, waxy oilskin was difficult to work with, and the tear was awkward. She spent an hour mending it, her fingers cramping around the thick thread. The next morning, Cole saw the slicker, now neatly repaired and hung back on the hook. He said nothing. He simply entered the kitchen and found the small wooden sewing basket she used, which contained the few things she had brought to Montana. Inside, he saw the small rips and tears on the cuffs of her own shawl, clearly needing mending. That afternoon, Eliza found Cole at the workbench, not fixing a fence post, but hunched over her shawl, clumsily attempting to mend the frayed cuff. He was using a large, blunt needle and thick ranch thread, and the stitches were uneven and crude, betraying his unfamiliarity with delicate fabric. Yet the work was undeniably painstaking and careful. "Mr. McKenna, what are you doing?" she asked, astonished. Cole didn't look up, concentrating fiercely on his work. "You fixed my coat, I'm fixing your shawl. Symmetry. If you're going to be out here, you need to stay warm." His stitches were awful, but the effort was moving. She took the shawl back with a gentle smile. "Thank you. Cole, I'll take over now, but thank you for the attempt." That evening, they shared a small, quiet moment over dinner. Eliza, tired and distracted, had accidentally scorched the edges of the cornbread she had baked. It was black at the edges and a little doughy in the middle. She pushed the plate away. "Embarrassed. I apologize. I got distracted by a land survey map. I am better with numbers than temperature." Cole took a bite of the scorched cornbread, chewing deliberately. He looked at the burnt edge, then at Eliza, a genuine warm laugh finally escaping him. "Miss Hart, it's not bad. It just tastes like ambition. We have plenty of that here. At least you didn't set the kitchen on fire." They laughed. A short, shared moment of relief and proximity, and Eliza realized that it was the first time she had genuinely relaxed since arriving. This moment of shared, imperfect life affirmed for her that staying could, perhaps, be a choice, not just a necessity. The social pressure began to mount. Silas Crowell, seeing the new educated woman on Cole's ranch and recognizing her value as a formidable bookkeeper, started a campaign of malicious rumor. He circulated the story that Eliza was a mail-order bride gone bad, or a cancellation, implying she was either damaged goods or lacked the necessary character for the marriage market. The rumor was designed to undermine her credibility and make her an easy target for local gossip and derision. The townsfolk, already suspicious of a self-sufficient woman, began to whisper whenever Eliza appeared with Cole. The most dangerous twist came with a small tragedy. Toby, the young horse hand, was found shivering violently, drenched in sweat and feverish. He had been bitten by a mosquito in the low, marshy ground near the communal meadow, and was clearly suffering from swamp fever. Eliza, remembering her texts, recognized the cyclical nature of the fever. She immediately set about mixing a simple medicine, forcing fluids, and applying cool cloths. Cole was frantic. He needed to leave the ranch unattended to ride hard for the nearest doctor, 3 days away. "There's no time," Eliza stated, her medical knowledge overriding her fear. "We need cinchona bark, or failing that, the inner bark of the white willow tree. It contains the acid that eases the pain and fever. I can care for him. Cole, but you must ride to the swamp edge and get the bark, quickly." Trusting her competence, Cole obeyed without question. He rode out into the night, the image of Eliza sitting by the sick boy, her face pale but determined, burned into his mind. He returned before dawn, exhausted, with a small pouch of damp, bitter willow bark. Eliza brewed the bark and nursed Toby through the night. It was an intense, shared vigil. She applied her academic knowledge to a life-or-death situation, and Cole trusted her implicitly. By morning, the worst of the fever had broken, and Toby was resting easily. In that quiet dawn, watching the boy breathe peacefully, the truth of their interdependence became visible. The emotional connection deepened not through romance, but through shared survival and quiet compassion. As Cole went to check on the herd, Eliza picked up the repaired saddle she had been working on. The saddle leather was stiff and cracked, held together by the strong, uneven stitches of waxed cord she had applied. The cracking hide was a perfect symbol of Cole's faith, battered by betrayal and hardship. Her careful mending, the needle piercing the tough material, was the physical act of stitching her own life back together, choosing to mend the broken parts of the ranch as she mended her own trajectory. The frayed leather and the crude stitching were not beautiful, but they were resilient. The contract was long forgotten. They were now partners in a deeper, more necessary kind of survival. The air was washed clean by the fierce downpour that had accompanied Toby's fever breaking. It was a cold, unexpected deluge for late summer, too fast to soak deeply into the parched earth, but enough to settle the dust and bring the scent of pine and damp clay into the valley. The next morning broke clear, a fragile, hopeful dawn. The ranch was quiet, the exhaustion of the sleepless vigil still hanging in the air. Toby, safely nestled in blankets near the fireplace, was in a deep, healing sleep. Eliza, determined to conquer her greatest practical failure, slipped out to the barn well before Cole. She carried the whittled wooden bucket, its handle now smooth and easy in her palm, like a small, stubborn banner of her progress. Daisy, the Jersey cow, seemed marginally calmer after the rain, chewing her breakfast of oats with a lazy indifference. Eliza knelt on the three-legged stool. She closed her eyes for a moment, recalling the diagram of the cow's udder from one of her old medical texts, trying to apply anatomical logic to the soft, warm reality of the beast. She reached out, applied the pressure as Cole had instructed, firm, not gentle, and pulled. Success. A thin, uneven jet of milk shot out, but instead of landing in the bucket, it hissed against the rough planking of the stall floor. She adjusted her aim, tried again, and the second stream, stronger this time, shot violently over the rim of the bucket and splattered against her cheek. Eliza sighed, a mixture of frustration and self-directed ridicule. She was a woman who could manage the complicated financial accounts of a struggling ranch, but she could not manage one simple, four-legged mammal. It was ludicrous. She adjusted the stool again, leaning in too close this time, and when she squeezed, Daisy shifted her weight slightly, sending a third, wide stream of milk directly down the outside of the pail. The bucket was nearly empty, the floor was sticky, and her pride was bruised. "Blast it all," Eliza muttered, wiping the milk from her face with the back of her hand. She was so absorbed in her failure that she didn't hear Cole approach until he was right behind her. He had shed the dust of the trail, and now smelled only of soap and the faint, clean scent of worn leather. "You're still aiming for the horizon, Miss Hart," Cole's voice murmured, low and steady, close to her ear. "You need to aim for the floor of the bucket, right where the metal curves." Eliza froze. His presence, so sudden and contained, filled the small space behind her. She could feel the steady warmth of his body, the rhythm of his breathing, the slight shift of the air as he moved. It was an intimacy entirely unexpected, yet utterly devoid of malice or aggression. It was simply two people standing too close, shoulder to shoulder, in the confined space of a barn. She felt a flush rise instantly from her collar to her hairline. It wasn't the embarrassment of being caught failing. It was the intense, physical awareness of Cole McKenna. "I find," Eliza confessed, her voice thick with a sudden heat, "that the moment I think about the process, the milk chooses a different trajectory. It is an exercise in mental humility." Cole reached out, his large, rough hands, bearing the calluses of rope and wood and iron, settled over her own smaller, softer hands, which were accustomed to pen and needle. It wasn't a grab or a sudden clasp. It was a deliberate placement. His weight shifted slightly as he settled in to guide her. His hands covered hers entirely, guiding her grip on the cow's teat, He applied the pressure, the firm squeeze, and then the release and the slight roll of the wrist. It was a complex, coordinated action, and his instruction was physical, delivered with an intense focus on the task. "Not just pull," Cole whispered, his voice vibrating quietly in the stillness of the barn. A sound meant only for her. "Squeeze the top first, trap the milk, then pull down, like this, trap, then push." The force of his hands was immense, yet controlled, never crushing. The heat from his palms soaked through her skin. She felt the powerful tension of his forearms, the steady expansion and contraction of his chest as he breathed, his body close enough to be an anchor, close enough to feel the slight rasp of his wool shirt against her back. The closeness was based entirely on trust and tuition, not conquest or desire. And the milk flowed. A strong, straight, hissing stream landed cleanly in the bottom of the bucket, joining the small pool already there. Daisy, surprisingly, stood still, resigned to the competent touch. Eliza's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The flush in her cheeks was now undeniable. She felt a wave of confused emotion, a profound satisfaction in the success of the task, and a dizzying awareness of the man behind her. It was a sense of being entirely safe, entirely seen, and entirely competent, all wrapped up in the shared, small space. "There," Cole breathed out, his hand still over hers, the rhythm continuing. "Steady and professional. You see the difference. Miss Hart, it's not about strength. It's about rhythm and conviction." He held the position for another minute, until the bucket was a quarter full, and the rhythm was hers. Not his. Then, slowly, respectfully, he withdrew his hands, stepping back slightly, restoring the acceptable distance between them. Eliza leaned her forehead against the cow's flank for a moment, steadying herself. She was blushing furiously, but beneath the embarrassment of the physical proximity, there was a feeling she hadn't allowed herself to entertain since she left Missouri, a sense of belonging, a potential for partnership. Cole stood silent for a moment, looking at the bucket, looking at her flushed face, a strange, intense concentration in his blue eyes. Then, he spoke the words that were both the title of their story and the promise of a future, the phrase from the outline, whispered low and sincere, entirely stripped of any coarse meaning. "I'll teach you everything," he said quietly. He did not mean the physical intimacies of a man and woman. He meant the ranch, the ropes, the rules of this unforgiving territory. He meant the lessons of survival, of reading the weather, the water, and the intent of men like Silas Crowell. He was offering an education, a safe harbor, a choice. Eliza finally raised her head. Turning to face him, she still felt the heat from his hands lingering on hers. For the first time, she allowed herself to articulate the central difficulty of the task, using the dry humor she'd practiced in her books. "Cole," she said, using his first name without thinking, a small, natural slip. She hesitated, then plunged ahead. I fear, a complete novice in the dairy arts. If you must know, I am a virgin in the realm of cow's udders." Cole's lips twitched again, a clearer, faster sign of amusement than she had ever witnessed. "I figured," he drawled, leaning back against the stall. "And I, Miss Hart, am the hardest taskmaster in these mountains. It's going to take patience. You'll get it." The shared instruction, the moment of physical trust, had reached a tipping point. She realized, looking at his serious, principle-driven face, that staying here was no longer just a contractual escape from Missouri debt. It was becoming a deliberate choice. "Maybe," Eliza said softly, watching the milk settle in the pail. "Staying might be a choice." "It always is," Cole agreed, his voice suddenly grave. "Never forget that. In this life, every day is a choice." The brief, quiet moment was broken by Toby's small voice calling from the house, asking for water. Cole gave Eliza a short, decisive nod. "We need to check the boundaries today. Eliza, that rain will have made Silas restless." He used her first name. a quiet acknowledgement of the changed dynamic. The midpoint of the story had been reached. The two individuals, wounded by past betrayals and pressures, had actively chosen to be on the same side, bound by a shared sense of dignity and the growing fight for the life-giving water. The fight was no longer just Cole's, it was theirs. Cole went to fetch the horses. Eliza packed the ledger and the old, rolled-up Bear Creek map. She felt renewed, fortified by the morning's awkward lesson and the sincere promise that followed. As she stepped out of the barn, her eyes automatically scanned the horizon, a habit she had picked up from Cole. Far off, near the northern boundary marker where the land began to rise toward Silas Crowell's extensive grazing territory, she saw it a thin, vertical wisp of smoke, barely discernible against the pale morning sky. It was not a cooking fire. It was too small, too localized. It was the calculated, arrogant smoke of Silas's hands burning the wooden survey stakes, the boundary markers that delineated the old property lines. The act was a clear signal he was erasing the past, physically challenging Cole's claim before the courts could even be involved. The water crisis was escalating, and Silas Crowell had just cast the first spark. The burning stakes on the horizon were Cole's cue. He and Eliza rode out immediately, confirming that Silas Crowell was systematically erasing the old, vague boundary markers. This act of aggression signaled that Silas was ready to move the water conflict into the public arena, where he could leverage his influence against Cole's legal claim. The perfect venue arrived with the annual Harvest Social, held at Father O'Rourke's church in Last Chance. It was the only communal event that brought every rancher, farmer, and townsman together before the snows began. The social was an affair of strained goodwill and heavy expectations. Men traded whispered gossip while their wives displayed their best canned preserves and needlework. Silas Crowell dominated the proceedings, his large frame draped in an expensive coat, holding court near the punch bowl. He was raising money, he announced loudly, for a community water initiative. "We must stop the waste," Silas declared to the assembled crowd. "The old ways are failing us. I propose we all pitch in to dig a communal diversion ditch and build a new, shared holding pond, a true communal water source, run by a town committee, a committee that will ensure fair usage, unlike the current selfish arrangements." Everyone knew this was a thinly veiled attempt to fund a canal that would intersect and control the flow of Bear Creek, essentially draining the water before it reached Cole's property. Silas was framing theft as philanthropy. As Cole watched, his face a mask of iron control, Silas spotted Eliza standing quietly by the back wall, observing the crowd. "Ah, Mr. McKenna's esteemed new bookkeeper," Silas boomed, walking toward her with a predatory smile. "Come forward, Miss Hart. We were just discussing community values. Since you have such a clear mind and such a profound education, all those books you carried on the stagecoach, perhaps you could speak on the delicate matter of female virtues in a rugged environment like ours. After all, an unattached woman, fresh from a long journey, must understand the importance of fitting in." It was a public, deliberate humiliation, a pointed jab at the rumors he himself had started about her being a failed mail-order bride. Silas intended to force her to choose between defending herself and undermining Cole's position. Eliza felt the collective gaze of the community settle upon her, a heavy, judgmental pressure. Her face remained composed, but her knuckles whitened as she gripped the small, carved wooden cross Father O'Rourke had given her. She took a deep breath, stepping forward and meeting Silas's gaze directly. "Mr. Crowell," Eliza began, her voice clear and carrying, though slightly trembling at first, "I would be delighted to speak on community values. My expertise is in recording the truth of a transaction, and the true value of a person here is not measured by marriage or rumor, but by contributions." She turned to face the crowd. "In the past few weeks, Cole McKenna has faced sabotage to his fences, threats to his livelihood, and the threat of fever in his home. In that time, I have meticulously reconciled his ledgers, ensuring that he pays every creditor fairly, including ensuring fair and equitable pricing for the salt we trade with the Crow sheep herders, something many here refuse to do." She looked pointedly at Silas. "And when young Toby was struck by swamp fever, I did not leave the ranch to let a child die. I stayed and nursed him back to health. Mr. McKenna rode through the night to gather the medicine I needed. That is the contribution of this ranch honesty in trade, fairness to neighbors, and compassion in crisis. She finished, her gaze leveling back at Silas. You raise money for a ditch, Mr. Crowell. We invested our time and risk to save a life, if you want to talk about female virtue. I can tell you that virtue is best found in courage and competence, not in gossip and gold watches. A stunned silence fell over the room. Silas, momentarily checked, sputtered, but the accounts, that ledger is nothing but an attempt to defraud the bank. Cole, who had been listening from the edge of the crowd, stepped forward, placing a steady, protective hand on the small of Eliza's back. It was a gesture of clear, unambiguous alignment. Miss Hart's accounts are immaculate. Silas, Cole stated flatly, and unlike yours, they don't show any unexplained payouts to the town sheriff. You keep your focus on your ditch. I'll keep mine on my water. The public confrontation, though deeply uncomfortable, affirmed their partnership and Eliza's place on the ranch. Immediately after the exchange, Father O'Rourke pulled Eliza aside, his old eyes kind and appreciative. You have a good, righteous fire in you, my dear, the priest whispered, and you may have just saved Cole's neck, but he needs more than a clear ledger. He needs a clearer deed. Father O'Rourke then led her into the church archives, a dusty, climate-controlled room filled with records dating back decades. He pulled out a fragile, rolled document, brittle with age and sealed with the official stamp of the territorial governor, an original 1871 survey map, drawn up during the first railway expansion. This map was drawn up before the railroad land grants changed everything, Father O'Rourke explained, handing the document to Eliza. It marks the water source, the specific underground spring that feeds Bear Creek, not by the mossy stone, but by its geological coordinates relative to the old county courthouse foundation, which is still standing. According to this, the critical water source lies deep within the McKenna boundary. This was the legal breakthrough. The vague deed had been clarified by the old survey, but the map was only a secondary source. It needed to be officially presented and certified by the district court judge in the county seat, Bounty Ridge. Before Cole and Eliza could formulate a plan to certify the document, nature itself intervened. The drought, briefly interrupted by the fever-breaking rain, came back with a vengeance, bringing a new, terrifying test of survival. A massive swarm of grasshoppers, a biblical plague of locusts, descended upon the valley. They chewed through the remaining corn crop in a single afternoon and began devouring the reserve hay and feed grain Cole had stored for the winter. The ranch's reserve fodder vanished almost instantly, pushing the possibility of herd survival to the brink. Cole looked at the devastation, his face gaunt with exhaustion and worry. They've eaten all the insurance we had. Eliza, we can't feed the stock through the winter, not without water. It was Eliza's moment to bet everything on her own kind of knowledge, the abstract, bookish kind. She recalled a footnote in a geological text she had read about limestone aquifers in the Western Territories. Go, she said urgently, pointing to the chalky soil near the far eastern edge of the property, land that Cole had always dismissed as useless scrub. According to the geological survey I studied, that entire ridge is part of a large, cracked limestone formation. Limestone stores water. I believe there is an unmapped, secondary vein of water trapped in the strata there, entirely separate from Bear Creek. Cole stared at her. You want to spend the last of our reserve capital, what we have left for emergency salt and wire, to dig a hole in the scrubland, based on a footnote in one of your books? Yes, Eliza insisted. We can't fight Silas with the water we have. We have to create the water we need. If that geological theory is correct, it could sustain us even if Silas cuts Bear Creek entirely. It's a calculated risk. Cole, but the math is simple without water. We die. We have 10 days' feed left for the entire herd. We have to drill. It was the ultimate test of trust. Cole had to choose between his instinctual knowledge of the land and Eliza's abstract, scholarly conviction. He looked at the devastation of the grasshoppers, the burned boundary markers, and the implacable greed of Silas Crowell. His hand went to the last of the ranch's small emergency fund. "All right, Eliza," he said, his voice flat with the weight of the decision. "You start flagging the location. We start digging in the morning." They hired a man and a rudimentary drill rig, and for 3 punishing days, they drilled. The crew was skeptical, muttering about the city woman's folly. Cole worked alongside them, his silence a strange mixture of faith and desperation. On the 3rd afternoon, the drill bit broke through. A sudden, violent gush of water erupted from the hole. The ranch hands cheered, exhausted and relieved. Eliza laughed, a pure, soaring sound of triumph. She had been right. Her theory had paid off. But the triumph was short-lived. The water was heavily mineralized, milky white and thick with sediment, a necessary, life-saving, but undrinkable mess. "It's polluted," Cole stated grimly. "It's useless for drinking and cooking." "Not useless," Eliza corrected, rushing to the newly opened vein. "It's just dirty. It needs filtration. We can use the ranch's resources, charcoal from the cook stove, layers of clean sand, hay, and filtering cloth. We can build a large, elevated filter bed. The water will clear. It will take time, but we have a source." The entire ranch, including Toby, who was slowly regaining his strength, pitched in to construct the massive filtration system. They lined a large wooden trough with layers of charcoal, straw, and old burlap, funneling the well water through the system into a clean holding tank. It was communal labor born of necessity, and the water, though tasting faintly of sulfur, finally ran clear enough to drink. That night they slept deeply, buoyed by the small, vital victory. Silas Crowell's response was swift and terrible. He was enraged by the discovery of the secondary water source. Eliza's move had foiled his slow choke strategy. At midnight, the air was split by the loud, urgent clang of the old bell at May Thompson's saloon, ringing out the community alarm. May had spotted the movement on the horizon. The black spur hands had ridden onto the McKenna property and set fire to the freshly stacked reserve hay, the last of the winter fodder they had managed to salvage from the grasshoppers. The flames roared, a great, hungry pillar of light and heat. Everyone, including May, who had ridden hard to ring the bell, rushed to the ranch. They formed a desperate line, passing buckets of water from the new, slightly sulfuric well and fighting the fire with everything they had. The heat was scorching, and the smoke was acrid and thick. Eliza worked frantically alongside Cole, passing buckets, tearing away burning hay bales, and keeping Toby safe near the pump. In the heat and chaos, a burning plank from the hay platform fell. Eliza shoved Toby out of the way, but the plank grazed her right hand. She cried out, a sharp, immediate sound of pain, dropping the bucket. Cole looked over, his eyes wide with fear and anger. He saw the fire, the destruction, and Eliza kneeling, nursing her raw, reddened hand. The fire was eventually contained, but the reserve was destroyed. Silas had delivered a crippling blow. Later, sitting on the porch as the sun rose over the smoldering ruin of the hayrick, Cole examined Eliza's hand. It was an ugly, shallow burn across the palm and wrist. He gently applied a poultice of lard and ash, his movements rough but careful. "This is enough." "Eliza," Cole said, his voice tight with frustration and defeat. "Silas is playing for keeps. I will send you to the doctor in Bounty Ridge, and then you can take the train south. I don't want you caught in this trap. I won't risk your life for this land." Eliza pulled her hand gently away from his. She looked at the desolate ranch, at the steaming, triumphant new well, and at the man who was now willing to sacrifice everything to save her. "I have faced the choice of running before." "Cole," she replied, her eyes steady. "In Missouri. The wind had no name. It was just the pressure of 100 people telling me what to do. Here, at least the toxic wind calls my name, Silas Crowell. I will not run. We found the water. We will win the land." In Last Chance, May Thompson watched the dust settle. She had witnessed the moment in the barn between Cole and Eliza, the physical intimacy of the milking lesson. She was a practical woman who held a deep, quiet respect for Cole. Seeing the intense connection, the undeniable bond formed in shared risk and care, May made a high-minded choice. She would not pursue Cole. She would support the new, formidable partnership. Cole left the house and returned with a small, rough object in his hand. It was a crude, heavy iron ring, hammered and folded from a piece of discarded horseshoe nail, a small, dark token of iron. It was utterly devoid of aesthetic value, but solid and true. He tied the small ring to the leather thong Eliza wore around her neck. "It's not a proposal," Cole stated, his eyes searching hers, utterly serious. "It's a broken nail, reforged. It means you are staying. It means we are building something that won't break." Eliza touched the cold metal against her skin, the simplest, most profound offering of permanence. It wasn't jewelry. It was a promise of resilience. She knew this was the emblem of her choice. She would fight for the land that had accepted her, and the man who had chosen to trust her completely. The dry, brittle landscape, already ravaged by drought and the grasshoppers, suddenly unleashed its most terrifying weapon, the sandstorm. It hit the valley with the speed of an express train, a boiling ochre wave that swallowed the horizon. The sun vanished, replaced by an abrasive, suffocating gloom. The wind howled through the ranch, carrying grit that stripped paint from the wood and stung the skin like tiny, sharp needles. Cole, Eliza, and Toby, along with Jess, their hired hand, scrambled to secure the house and the horses, but the main herd, already grazing far out near the meager grass left, was caught flat-footed. Within minutes, the storm had scattered the bewildered cattle, pushing them blind and terrified across the open range. Cole and Jess rode out immediately, their faces wrapped in bandanas, followed by Eliza and Toby on horseback, carrying the precious storm lanterns. The roar of the wind was deafening. Visibility dropped to mere feet. The four riders lost sight of each other within a quarter hour, swallowed by the thick, churning dust. Eliza and Cole, by sheer luck, found themselves side by side, pressing their horses onward, navigating by instinct and the barely visible, sputtering glow of Eliza's oil lantern. Toby's small, frantic voice was soon lost to the tempest. "They'll try to use this," Cole shouted over the wind, his voice strained. "Silas Black Spur will push the cattle onto his land." They rode in the direction Cole calculated the wind was driving the herd. But the disorientation was complete. The storm wasn't just a natural disaster. It was a cover for malicious human action. As the grid eased slightly in the deepest part of the night, they found the first tangible proof of foul play, not cattle tracks, but a clear set of boot prints, deliberately scuffing the ground near a small ridge. "They're wearing boots with iron hooks on the heels," Eliza observed, crouching down, her headlamp casting a small circle of light. She immediately recognized the deliberate attempt at deception. "And look here, Cole, they've turned their heels backwards, trying to make us think they rode away from this spot, back toward our ranch." Cole was astonished. "Where did you learn that trick?" "From a book on frontier espionage," Eliza admitted, her voice entirely devoid of pride, focused only on the trail. "The military used it against the Apache. Simple psychology. They want us to chase ghosts." "But you followed the true direction," Cole realized. "The weight distribution is all wrong for a forward stride. Even with the tracks reversed, they're driving the cattle north, toward Silas's land." They abandoned the false trail and rode hard into the wind's diminishing pressure, following the subtle, fresh marks left by the cattle's desperate hooves. The confrontation came hours later, just before the first faint hint of dawn. At the edge of the scrubland that marked the unofficial border between the McKenna Ranch and the vast Barcy territory, they found a small group of 3 men trying to herd a cluster of 30 panicked calves through a temporary gap in a wire fence. One of the Black Spur hands, a young, nervous man named Rook, turned first, raising his rifle reflexively. Eliza reacted instantly. She yanked the oil lamp from its hook on the saddle and swung it directly up into the still swirling grit. The sputtering light, amplified by the lens, flared into Rook's eyes, blinding him momentarily against the dark backdrop of the receding storm. "Don't move," Cole roared, his voice amplified by the quiet pause in the wind. In the ensuing second of darkness and confusion, Cole surged forward, knocking the rifle from Rook's hand and slamming the younger man against a fence post. The two other rustlers, startled by the lantern trick and Cole's sudden, silent fury, dropped their reins and vanished into the fading dust cloud. Cole held Rook pinned, the muzzle of his own sidearm pressed firmly, not to the man's head, but to the fence post beside him. Cole was breathing heavily, his principles holding him back from a killing shot. "We saw your tracks." "Rook," Cole stated, his voice a low, terrifying rumble. "You were driving my calves. Why are you risking your neck for Silas?" Rook, young and clearly terrified, his eyes red-rimmed from the dust and the sudden bright light, broke immediately. "He told us to push the herd onto the Bar-C land and claim they strayed," Rook stammered. "He's going to say you can't manage your stock. He needs to sink you. Cole, he needs the land free so he can sell the whole damn valley to the railroad for the right-of-way." The truth, revealed in the storm and the dust, was more alarming than simple land grabbing. Silas wasn't just fighting for water, he was fighting for a massive, capitalistic buyout, and Cole's land, the water line, was the last inconvenient obstacle. Silas needed Cole to lose everything to force the sale at a rock-bottom price. Cole released Rook, kicking the fallen rifle away. "Get out of here. Rook, and tell Silas I'm coming for him. If I see you on my land again, I won't look for the reverse track prints." As the last of the dust storm lifted, Cole and Eliza began the exhausting work of rounding up the calves. The terror of the night had stripped away all reserve, leaving them with only the raw honesty of survival. They found a small, sheltered rock overhang where they could rest their horses and wait for full daylight. Cole built a tiny, protected fire from damp sagebrush. Eliza sat near the flame, the makeshift wedding ring of the iron nail cold against the sweaty skin of her neck. "In Missouri," she said quietly, staring into the flame. "My father's cousin told me if I didn't marry the landholder, they would seize the last of the farm to cover the debts. They didn't care about me. I was just collateral. I ran because the alternative was a life contract I didn't sign." It was the first time she had articulated the full, brutal truth of her flight, exposing the deep, personal fracture that had driven her west. Cole stoked the fire, his movements slow and deliberate. "Alice left in '82, he said, his voice flat, emotionless. "She didn't leave with a man, or because I was cruel. She left with a circus troupe. She said she hated the quiet, hated the dirt, hated the fact that everything here was the same every day. She left a note, polite, said I was too reliable. She wanted the excitement of the next town, the applause, the lack of commitment." He looked up, his eyes meeting hers across the small flame. "I knew I should have been looking for signs in the ledgers, but I never did. She left because she realized she hadn't chosen the life. She'd just settled for it. I learned two things that day. Eliza, never trust what you can't read in black and white, and never ask anyone to stay for you." Their confessions were two sides of the same broken coin, Eliza running from forced commitment, Cole wounded by chosen abandonment. It was a crisis of trust, and by sharing it, they began to forge an honest foundation built on acknowledged cracks. While they rested, back in Last Chance, the community was beginning to mobilize. Father O'Rourke and Mae Thompson, acting on the news of the sabotage and the revelation of Silas Crowell's railroad scheme, had rallied the small farmers and the honest ranch hands. They recognized that if Silas won, everyone's water rights would be compromised. Mae, using her saloon as an impromptu command center, organized a communal work party. They used every available piece of lumber, canvas, and iron to construct a massive, temporary wooden sluice, a temporary water flume leading from the new, dirty well on the McKenna land to the communal holding tank. The goal was to share the filtered water and demonstrate community solidarity against Silas's divisive tactics. It was a strategy of unity and survival. The crisis intensified dramatically when a detachment of territorial rangers arrived at the McKenna Ranch, bearing an official warrant. "Cole McKenna," the ranger sergeant announced, his voice stern. "You are ordered to cease and desist all cattle operations and face sequestration of your herd. Silas Crowell has filed a preemptive injunction, claiming gross negligence in water usage and accusing you of stealing his wire and driving his cattle. You have 10 days to appear at the district court in Bounty Ridge with certified proof of your water rights. If you fail, the bank will seize your stock and the land will be put up for sale." The ultimatum was clear. Silas had used the cover of the storm to file his legal attack, ensuring Cole was hit financially first. The paper war had begun, and Cole was losing. That evening, after the rangers had left, the ranch was eerily quiet. Cole and Eliza sat on the porch. The last vestiges of the sandstorm had cleared, leaving the sky crystalline and vast. Eliza, weary to the bone, laid her head down on Cole's discarded heavy canvas jacket. It was a gesture of exhausted comfort, not seduction. Cole reached out a hand, hesitating, then gently smoothed the hair back from her forehead. "You don't have to stay through this." "Eliza," Cole said, his voice barely audible, "you have your ticket money. If I lose this, you'll be dragged into the ruin. You don't need to hold me up." Eliza lifted her head slightly, meeting his eyes in the fading light. "I don't hold you up. Cole, that sounds like a burden. I choose to be here. You are fighting for honesty. And you trusted me with your name and your books when no one else in this whole valley would give an unattached woman a clean look." She sat up, resting her hand on the cold iron nail ring around her neck. "You don't need to keep me," she repeated. Cole looked at the worn leather and the rough iron, his own voice heavy with the admission he rarely spoke. "I don't keep. I choose to see you here." The moment, simple and profound, cemented their fragile, honest commitment. The flickering light of the storm lantern, which they now kept burning constantly near the door, became the visual symbol of their small, tenacious hope, a fragile light of truth burning brightly and persistently against the overwhelming darkness of nature and greed. The final blow from Silas Crowell was swift, calculated, and devastating. It came 2 days after the Rangers' ultimatum, just as Cole and Eliza were working frantically to prepare their defense for the Bounty Ridge court date. Silas's old, dilapidated bone shed, a structure he used to store various refuse from his vast ranch, suddenly went up in flames. The fire was massive, casting a hideous orange glow against the night sky. The next morning, the local sheriff, a man named Henderson, whose pockets were clearly lined with Silas's gold, rode out to the McKenna Ranch, his face grim with false formality. "Cole McKenna," the sheriff announced, reading from a hastily prepared warrant, "you are under arrest. Arson. The bone shed was incinerated last night. We found evidence." "Evidence?" Cole demanded, stepping forward. Silas burned his own useless structure. "He's trying to frame me." Sheriff Henderson stepped past Cole, his gaze sweeping the ranch and landing, with cold, deliberate focus, on Eliza. He held up a small, charred piece of fabric, a fragment of woolen shawl. "We found this near the site," Henderson said, his voice accusatory. "A piece of a woman's garment. It matches the description of the shawl worn by Miss Eliza Hart. Your new hand." The fragment was indeed from the shawl Cole had clumsily tried to mend for Eliza. It was a perfect, malicious plant. Silas had anticipated Eliza's public defiance and was now using her presence to frame Cole, implicating her as an accomplice. "The accusation is that you hired this woman to incite violence." "Mr. McKenna," the sheriff said, cuffing Cole's wrists firmly. "She is a primary suspect. The evidence of the burned hayrick is damning enough. Now, arson. I am taking you to the jail in last chance." Eliza watched, numb, as Cole was led away. She saw the cold, self-satisfied look in the sheriff's eyes. the complete corruption of justice. Cole was locked away, silenced, prevented from reaching Bounty Ridge to file his claim. Eliza was left on the ranch, alone, branded as a co-conspirator. She was given no time to wallow. The ranch, now under unofficial lockdown by the Rangers, felt desolate and vast. That evening, a cold, hard rain began to fall, turning the dust into slick, unforgiving mud. Eliza sat at the kitchen table, the main ledger open before her, the old, rolled 1871 map lying next to it, all useless now, with Cole in a cell. She reached for the chipped enamel cup Cole placed for her every morning. It was cold, empty, and slick with moisture. The small, silent gesture of care that had meant so much now felt like a gaping void, an immediate, painful symbol of her utter isolation and despair. The dark night of the soul had descended. She was alone, feared, and the truth of her innocence would not save Cole from Silas's relentless greed. But Eliza Hart was a woman who ran from coercion, not from a fight she had chosen. The cold coffee cup was a trigger, forcing her to move. She realized she couldn't fight Silas with facts and ledgers if the facts couldn't reach the judge. She packed the 1871 map, the ledger, and the last of her money. She rode to Last Chance under the cover of the heavy rain, navigating the treacherous roads alone. Her first stop was the jailhouse. She slipped a short, urgent message to Cole through the bars, asking for instructions. Cole's reply, scribbled quickly on a scrap of paper, was handed back to her moments later. It was short, definitive, and protective. If you have to leave this mess, go. Take the first train. I do not want you dragged down. Eliza stared at the paper in the dim light of the lantern, tears mixing with the rainwater on her face. Cole was still protecting her, even from behind bars. She slowly tore the note into small pieces, dropping the damp fragments into a puddle. I stay because I choose to, she whispered to the empty, rain-slicked street, the iron ring of the horseshoe nail cold and heavy around her neck. Her next, more dangerous stop was May Thompson's saloon. May was wary but loyal. Silas is celebrating. Eliza, May warned, wiping down the bar. He's running the town like a vulture. Why are you here? Silas has a ledger, Eliza stated, her voice steady. The one he keeps for his private transactions, the money he uses to buy the sheriff and pay off the railroad agent. The one he keeps here at the saloon for discretion. May hesitated. I don't touch his books, but I know where they are. He keeps them locked in the back storage room, under the liquor barrels. He trusts the darkness. Eliza convinced May to distract the night watchman, working quickly and with desperate urgency. Eliza managed to jimmy the lock on Silas's strongbox. Inside, next to a wad of dirty money, was a small, tightly bound ledger. She flipped through it quickly. The entries were thin, but damning small. Frequent payouts to Sheriff Henderson, large sums to an unspecified railway liaison, and an unnerving entry simply reading purchase of mining supplies. 3 cases dynamite. Silas was not just trying to steal water. He was preparing to physically destroy Cole's new well, or perhaps even use explosives to divert Bear Creek entirely. As Eliza secured the ledger, a sudden shadow fell across the barroom. It was Rook, the young black spur hand Cole had let go during the sandstorm. He was pale, nervous, and soaked to the bone. Miss Hart, Rook said, his voice barely a tremor. They're going to pin everything on you and Cole. They think I'm loose. Why are you here? Rook, Eliza asked, gripping Silas's ledger tightly. Silas is using the same threats on me he used on everyone, Rook admitted, his eyes wide with fear. He said if I talk, he'll hurt my little sister. Bess, she's staying with a family near Bounty Ridge. He'll cut her off. Rook had a younger sister, a vulnerable girl he was secretly supporting. It was his leverage, and Silas was using it. I'll testify. Miss Hart, Rook whispered, desperation clear in his voice. I'll tell the judge everything about the reverse tracks, the wire cutting, and the dynamite. But you have to get Bess out of Bounty Ridge first. Protect her, and I'm yours for the court." Eliza looked at May, who nodded grimly. The stakes had been raised. They now had an inside witness, but his cooperation depended on a dangerous, covert extraction of his sister. "We go now," Eliza decided. "Toby knows the back trails to Bounty Ridge. May, you ready the horses. Rook, you stay here. You'll be safer if they think you've run, and we need you fresh for the trial." The journey was a brutal affair. Eliza, May, and Toby rode through the night, battling rain, slick mud, and the constant fear of being intercepted by Silas's men. As they rode across a muddy incline, the earth gave way beneath Toby's horse. The boy screamed as the horse slid sideways down a narrow, rock-strewn crevice. Eliza reacted with the speed she had learned in the chaos of the ranch. She yanked the lasso she had struggled to master, whipping it out with a strength born of necessity. The loop settled firmly around the saddle horn of Toby's struggling horse, digging her own heels into the mud. Eliza pulled back with every ounce of strength she possessed, the leather cutting painfully into her burned palm. She held the rope taut, stabilizing the horse until May could reach them and help pull the animal and the terrified boy to safety. Toby clung to her, shaking, but unharmed. "You saved me, Miss Hart," Toby whispered, burying his face in her wet canvas jacket. "You saved yourself by staying calm." "Toby," Eliza corrected, flexing her aching, burned hand. "We don't panic, we act." They reached Bounty Ridge just before dawn, exhausted, mud-spattered, but carrying Silas Crowell's incriminating ledger and the ancient 1871 map. Eliza found the home where Bess was staying, presented herself as a cousin, and swiftly retrieved the girl, bringing her back to the safety of a secluded hotel room May secured. Finally, Eliza and May presented the evidence to the district court judge, an elderly, sharp-minded man named Judge Carter. He examined the 1871 map and Silas's illicit ledger. "The map is the oldest evidence, Miss Hart," Judge Carter said, tapping the fragile parchment. "It's compelling. Coupled with this ledger and the testimony of your witness, Rook, we have a case." He accepted the map for official certification and issued a temporary writ halting any action against Cole. "However," the judge stated, looking at the two mud-spattered women, "this is too politically charged for a closed hearing. Silas Crowell has too much influence. We will hold a public hearing and confrontation in 2 days, back in last chance. I want every citizen, every rancher, to witness the truth of this. Bring your witnesses, Miss Hart. Bring everything." Eliza had secured the evidence, the witness, and the legal recognition of the 1871 map, but the true, emotional test remained. She sent a final, desperate message to Cole in his jail cell. The reply came quickly, scribbled on the reverse side of a court summons, slipped to her by a friendly deputy May had bribed. Cole's message, though brief, was a final echo of his protective fear. "If you must leave, go. I do not want you dragged down with this. Be safe." Till Eliza stood alone outside the jail in the rain, pressing the paper to her cheek. She touched the cold iron of the horseshoe nail ring. She was no longer running from a forced future. She was running to a chosen one. "I stay because I want to," she murmured to the wet cobblestones, tearing up Cole's note, making the silent promise of resilience and love complete. The leather thong around her neck, bearing the crude iron ring, was dark and heavy with the rain, a symbol of the tough, unyielding promise she had made to this land and to this man. The Last Chance Town Hall was packed for the public hearing. Serving as the makeshift courtroom, Judge Carter, a man of imposing height and quiet authority, sat behind the raised podium, lending the proceedings a much-needed air of legal gravity. Cole, released from his cell just hours before the hearing under the writ issued by Judge Carter, sat at a small table, his face drawn but resolute. He wore clean ranch clothes, his body language still rigid with suppressed anger and the anxiety of the past 2 days. Silas Crowell was seated opposite, impeccably dressed. Flanked by a polished, expensive-looking lawyer he had brought in from Helena, Silas's counsel opened the case, painting Cole as a desperate, debt-ridden man who had resorted to arson and sabotage to secure water he did not legally possess. He used the planted piece of Eliza's shawl as his key physical evidence for the fire. The tension in the room was palpable, split between those who feared Silas and those who had benefited from his aggression. Eliza took the stand first. She was calm, wearing her most formal, though simple, dress. She was no longer just the bookkeeper. She was the defense's primary source of counter-evidence. She presented Silas's secret ledger, identifying the entries detailing payments to Sheriff Henderson and the large sum marked for mining supplies, which she correctly deduced was dynamite. Mae Thompson followed, her demeanor serious and uncompromising. She confirmed that Silas had stored the ledger in her saloon and verified the suspicious entries regarding the sheriff, establishing a clear pattern of corruption and influence peddling. Then came the turn of Father O'Rourke, the local priest, whose word was unimpeachable. He authenticated the old, fragile 1871 survey map, confirming that he had kept it in the church archives and that its geological markers were based on the permanent courthouse foundation, placing the mainspring firmly within the McKenna boundary. The defense then called Rook, the young black spur hand, terrified, but determined, took the stand. He confessed to cutting the wire and attempting to drive the cattle during the sandstorm, detailing Silas's instructions to blame Cole. Most critically, he exposed Silas's true motive, the deal with the railroad, and the location where Silas was hiding the remaining cases of dynamite, intended for use against the new McKenna well. The courtroom gasped. The evidence, meticulously gathered by Eliza and her allies, was beginning to turn the tide. Then came Eliza's final, pivotal testimony. She stood before the judge, not to discuss accounts, but geology. "Your Honor," Eliza began, her voice steady and clear, addressing the room, overcoming the deeply ingrained prejudice that a woman could not speak authoritatively on land and water. "Mr. Crowell claims that my discovery of the secondary well was either a fluke or an act of illegal tampering. I submit this." She unrolled a meticulously drawn diagram on the table, a map she had compiled from her textbook knowledge and her own observations of the ranch. It was a cross-section of the underlying rock structure. "The Bear Creek water that Mr. Crowell seeks to control is surface runoff, easily diverted," Eliza explained, using a pointer to trace the lines on the drawing. However, the McKenna Ranch sits directly atop a massive, stable limestone shelf. Water does not simply shift. It follows the path of least resistance. Our new well taps into a deep, secondary vein, entirely separate from Bear Creek, stored in a pressurized pocket within the shelf. It is a natural, separate source, not a stolen resource, she argued eloquently, transforming abstract academic knowledge into concrete legal defense, explaining why her new well had water, thereby debunking Silas's core claim that Cole's land was useless and that he was cheating the main water source. The sheer intellectual competence of her presentation silenced the room and visibly impressed Judge Carter. Just as Silas's lawyer rose to cross-examine, attempting to dismiss Eliza's geology as women's fairy tales, the climax erupted, blending the legal and the natural. A sound like distant thunder rumbled across the valley, not from the sky, but from the north. The heavy, unseasonable rains that had plagued the region for the past week, soaking the land and causing the muddy roads, had finally reached a tipping point. Suddenly, a rider burst into the courtroom, soaked and breathless. "Your Honor," the man yelled, "the Bear Creek Dam. The retaining wall Silas built upriver has burst. The creek is flooding. It's a flash flood." The dam Silas had secretly built, or, more accurately, poorly constructed to hold back and divert the Bear Creek flow, had failed under the unrelenting pressure of the rain. The pent-up water, the very lifeblood Silas had tried to hoard, was rushing down the valley. The timing was catastrophic for Silas and symbolic for Cole. The massive surge of water, nature's own, bypassed Silas's upstream holdings and, following the original, natural contours of the valley, rushed straight down the old, natural course, flowing exactly toward Cole's ranch, precisely where the 1871 map claimed the water should go. The natural flood was the final, undeniable piece of evidence. Nature itself had rendered judgment, washing away Silas's artificial barriers and affirming the legitimacy of Cole's land and its inherent claim to the natural water flow. In the chaos, Silas Crowell, realizing the jig was up, surged to his feet, knocking his chair over. "She's lying. It's a setup," Silas screamed, reaching for the sidearm he carried under his coat. The black spur hands, positioned outside the hall, panicked. They began firing their rifles into the air. A final, desperate show of intimidation. The courtroom devolved into pandemonium. Cole, released from his seat, instinctively moved to shield Eliza, pushing her behind the heavy judge's bench. Toby, who had been sitting quietly in the gallery, was screaming, caught in the flow of the panicked crowd rushing for the doors. Silas, attempting to flee through the side door, tripped over a loose floor plank. Judge Carter, with surprising speed, drew a small pistol and fired a shot into the ceiling, silencing the immediate panic inside. "Order! This court is still in session," Judge Carter roared. Outside, the black spur violence was quickly contained as the honest ranchers and townsfolk, enraged by the arson and the revelation of the dynamite, rushed to back Cole. In the midst of the chaos and the driving rain that had begun to fall heavily on the town, disaster struck again. The temporary wooden sluice that the community had built to carry the newly filtered well water from the McKenna well to the communal tank, the structure built by May and the others, gave way under the pressure of the runoff. A wave of water and debris slammed into the small drainage ditch where Toby was trying to shelter. The boy was swept off his feet, carried instantly toward the rushing, muddy torrent of the Bear Creek overflow. Cole, seeing the movement in the corner of his eye, yelled. Toby and sprinted out of the courtroom, into the blinding rain. He dove into the mud, fighting his way toward the struggling boy. Eliza was right behind him. She snatched the heavy, braided rawhide lasso from Cole's saddle, which was tied outside the hall. She anchored the rope around a sturdy hitching post, paying out the line with the strength and confidence of the lessons Cole had taught her. "Cole, catch, I've got the anchor," she screamed over the deluge. Cole, submerged to his waist, caught Toby just as the main surge of the flash flood hit. He was fighting the current, his boots losing purchase in the slick mud. Eliza pulled back on the rope with all her strength, her small, mended hands tearing at the rough leather, the pain in her burned palm irrelevant. It was a perfect, terrible synchronization. Cole fought the water, the elemental danger. Eliza fought the anchor, the physical resistance. Together, they pulled the mud-caked, terrified boy back to safety. They collapsed on the high ground, soaked and covered in mud. Toby sobbing hysterically but alive, Cole gasping for breath, and Eliza shaking violently, her hand bleeding slightly from where the rope had torn the fragile new skin. Cole looked at Eliza, the rainwater streaming down his face, washing away the dirt and the accumulated tension of years. He saw her competence, her courage, and her refusal to leave. Even when he had told her to run, the words burst out of him, ragged and honest, in a moment of utter, vulnerable surrender. "I was terrified I'd lose you," Cole admitted, his voice hoarse, overwhelmed by the sight of her risking everything. "I was afraid of losing you before I even had the courage to say I needed you." Eliza looked at him, her eyes bright and unwavering through the streaming rain. A faint, wet smile touched her lips, the fear finally giving way to a soaring, internal lightness. "Then say it," she whispered, her words stripped down to the necessary truth. "Say it now." The judge, emerging from the chaos, stabilized the situation based on the overwhelming evidence: Silas's ledger, Rook's testimony, Father O'Rourke's map, and the final, irrefutable testimony of the natural flood that destroyed Silas's diversion, Judge Carter issued his immediate judgment. The 1871 survey is certified. The water rights to the main spring and the subterranean source belong fully and legally to Cole McKenna, Judge Carter announced, his voice ringing with authority. Furthermore, Silas Crowell is placed under immediate arrest and temporary detention for the charges of conspiracy, attempted bribery, an investigation into the arson of the hayrick and the bone shed. Pending a full territorial investigation, case closed. The climax was complete. The floodwaters, raging through the valley, were nature's baptism, cleansing the valley of the dust of corruption and the bitterness of the drought. The internal conflict of both Eliza and Cole had been resolved in the terrifying, shared act of salvation. The external conflict, man against man, law against corruption, was settled. The law had spoken, and the land, through the voice of the torrent, had agreed. The rain slowly subsided, leaving behind a profound stillness and the scent of wet earth and vanquished malice. Silas Crowell, stripped of his bravado and his fine coat, was led away by the Rangers, his attempts at influence having dissolved in the torrent. His gang, the Black Spur, recognizing the end of their era, scattered immediately. With the legal victory secured and the immediate threat neutralized, the community of Last Chance turned its attention to healing. Cole, Eliza, May, and Father O'Rourke worked together to establish a true, cooperative solution to the water crisis. The raging flood, while destructive, had cleared the stream beds and demonstrated the path of nature. The official resolution came swiftly. The court declared Cole the rightful owner of the primary water source. But Eliza, recognizing that true survival depended on collective peace, presented a plan she had drafted overnight. The water is here to sustain the community, not just one ranch, Eliza explained to the assembled town council. I propose a water rotation ledger. Every ranch is guaranteed a certain number of hours of access to Bear Creek water, based on herd size, not property line. The underground well, the Hart Well, will remain an emergency communal source during periods of extreme drought. I will maintain the ledger, ensuring fairness and full transparency. The council, tired of Silas's high-handed approach and impressed by Eliza's clear, equitable plan, voted it in unanimously. The threat of legal tyranny was replaced by the order of shared resources, logged honestly in Eliza's careful script. The next few weeks were dedicated to rebuilding. Cole and Jess, helped by May and a few of the newly cooperative small ranchers, rebuilt the burned hayrick and repaired the fences. Eliza and Toby, now inseparable, focused on restoration around the ranch house. Toby, his fever gone and his eyes bright with hero worship for Eliza, would sit with her on the porch, where the laughter had replaced the whispers. She taught him to read not just words, but numbers, using the ledger as a workbook. 750 feet of barbed wire, Eliza would say, pointing to an entry. If the cattle need to be 10 feet apart, how long is the line? The simple, domestic scenes cemented Eliza's place. She had become the intellectual and emotional core of the ranch, recognized not for her pedigree, but for her competence and bravery. The progress in their personal relationship mirrored the recovery of the land, slow, steady, and inevitable. One morning, Eliza approached the barn for her routine chore. She was now completely proficient. The rhythm Cole had taught her was second nature. The milk streamed steadily, hitting the metal bucket with a clean, satisfying hiss. Cole watched her from the doorway, leaning against the frame, his arms crossed. Well, Cole, Eliza teased, looking up with a sly smile, her hands working effortlessly. Where is that hard taskmaster who taught me everything I seem to have mastered his curriculum? Cole pushed off the frame and walked toward her, his gaze steady and warm. He retired, Cole admitted, a quiet, deep warmth in his voice. He realized his education was incomplete. He yielded his place to a man who knows how to listen, especially to a woman who can find water where he only saw dust. The psychological distance between them had completely dissolved. They were no longer afraid to name the relationship that had grown from necessity into devotion. Cole shed his habit of drinking his morning coffee alone. He no longer placed the cold enamel cup outside the door for her to find. Now, he brought 2 steaming mugs to the kitchen table, sitting opposite her, ready to discuss the day's work and the future's plans. Eliza, for her part, brought out her trunk. She unpacked the last of her old Missouri possessions, a sign that she had fully divested from her past and was settling permanently into her chosen future. The simple, sincere commitment reached its peak one evening just as the sun was setting, washing the valley in deep tones of purple and gold. They were standing beneath a lone cottonwood tree near the barn, the air thick with the sweet smell of wet grass. Cole did not speak of love as grand passion. He spoke of it as shared work and enduring choice. He knelt, not grandly, but simply, on the soft, damp earth that the flood had nourished. He pulled the small, humble object from his pocket, the crude iron ring he had forged from a broken horseshoe nail, now polished smooth and bright by his own hand. "Eliza Hart," Cole said, holding out the rough ring, his eyes clear and direct. "This isn't gold, and it isn't fancy, but it's unbreakable, and it comes from this land, the same way you came to it, tough and true. I don't ask you to marry me so I can keep you. I ask you to choose me every single day, just as I choose you and this life." Eliza knelt before him, meeting his intensity with her own quiet strength. "I will choose you, Cole McKenna," she promised, taking the ring and slipping it onto her finger. The rough iron felt perfect, heavy with meaning. "But I also choose this land," she added, rising to her feet, "and if we are going to choose it, we must care for it properly. That flood was a warning. We need to replant rows of willow trees along the banks of Bear Creek to stabilize the banks and prevent future erosion. And we should sow Mediterranean grass seed, which is far more resistant to the plague of grasshoppers than the corn we lost." Cole smiled, his eyes full of pride and affection. A partnership, then the books, the water, the willows. "I'll learn to listen to the land through your books, and you learn the dirt through my hands. Yes, we choose all of it." The community's affirmation of their bond was immediate. Mae Thompson, lifting a glass of her strongest punch, offered a toast to the couple that had found love and saved the town's water supply. Father O'Rourke smiled warmly, recognizing the depth of their commitment. Toby, the small sentinel of their life, took a piece of red ribbon, a gift from May, and carefully tied it to the boundary post near the old spring, an emblem of the new. Secure line forged by law and affection. That night, the ranch was quiet. The air smelled of wet wood and survival. Cole performed his ritual one last time. He placed the chipped enamel cup outside the kitchen door, but this time, he did not walk away. He retrieved a second mug and sat on the porch, waiting. Eliza came out, picking up the first cup, and smiled. They sat together, side by side, sharing the silence and the simple, lukewarm coffee. The shared cup symbolizing the end of his lonely self-reliance and the beginning of their shared life. The storm lantern, cleaned and refilled, glowed brightly on the table, a composite symbol of their journey, the iron ring, the enamel cups, the lasso, and the new well-all tools of survival, now transformed into treasured objects of a family's history. In the weeks that followed, the town council formally adopted Eliza's water-sharing plan, in an act of true appreciation for the woman who had brought both legal victory and organizational sense to their water supply. They voted to rename the small bend where the creek surfaced on the edge of the McKenna property. It would no longer be known by its old, forgotten name, but as Hart's Bend, a tribute to the woman who had stood up and linked the community together. Their future was open, built on the solid ground of choice and mutual respect. The wedding was a simple, profound ceremony, a deliberate rejection of fanfare and excess. It took place 3 weeks after the hearing, beneath the massive old cottonwood tree at the edge of the newly named Hart's Bend. where Bear Creek flowed strong and clear once more. There was no white gown, only a practical, well-mended blue calico dress, and no fancy rings. Only the bright, polished iron band from the horseshoe nail on Eliza's finger, paired with a matching band Cole had forged for himself. The witnesses were the people who mattered. May Thompson, strong and smiling, stood as Eliza's witness. Father O'Rourke officiated, and Toby, standing taller than he had in months, served as Cole's proud, official best man. The townspeople who came were the honest ones, the small ranchers and farmers who benefited from the water rotation ledger, the crow herders who had been treated fairly, and the families who now drank from the reliable Hart well. As the sun cast long, golden shadows across the damp, revitalized earth, Father O'Rourke delivered a benediction stripped of all traditional pomp, focusing instead on the honest reality of life in the West. In this life, the priest pronounced, his voice gentle but firm, looking out at the challenging landscape. Love is not a soft blanket or a reprieve from hardship. It is a shared strength. The work does not end today. The weeds will still grow. The drought will return. But the greatest gift of this union is not the absence of struggle, but the ability to face it together. May your love not eliminate the weeds, but give your hands the knowledge and the courage to pull them out. The core themes of their long struggle had crystallized into this moment of resolution. They had both learned the meaning of being chosen and choosing in return, dismantling their internal barriers of fear and abandonment. The justice they achieved was not merely legal, but elemental. The courtroom's declaration, the community's consensus, and the flood's final, undeniable testament to the truth of the land. They had both grown from isolation to interdependence. Eliza's journey from a fragile, educated girl fleeing debt transformed her into the cornerstone of the community. She had arrived seeking merely a foothold and had ended up providing the foundation for collective survival, learning to trust in the tangible value of her own voice and labor, realizing that her mind was a greater weapon than any rifle. Cole, the taciturn man of iron will, had learned to shed the isolating armor of self-reliance that his former wife's betrayal had forced upon him. He learned that needing another person was not a weakness, but the deepest kind of strength, and that true ownership involved sharing the power of decision over both the land and the life-giving water. The major conflicts had run their course and been settled. Internal conflict. Their shared journey had moved them from the fear of abandonment and the fear of dependency to the secure courage of mutual trust. Interpersonal conflict. Silas was gone. Eliza had overcome the prejudice of the crowd, and May, with quiet dignity, had honored her self-respect by stepping aside, transforming a potential rival into a steadfast friend. Societal conflict. The lawless power of gossip and influence was dismantled by the establishment of fair, documented community rules over water rights. Elemental conflict, the dust, the plague of grasshoppers, and the sudden violent flood had tested their skills in solidarity, forcing them to work with nature rather than against it. The entire narrative had been driven by the singular, unwavering axis of water rights, using the simple details of ranch life, the scent of wet leather, the sting of hot dust, the rough sound of a cow's breathing to ground the story in a deep, sensory reality, avoiding melodrama but embracing honest human drama. The network of symbols had come to rest. The water was no longer merely a resource, but the right to life itself. The flood was natural judgment. The storm lantern, now hanging proudly and steadily lit over their newly reinforced porch, represented enduring hope. The horseshoe nail ring was their promise of tough, lasting commitment, and the enamel cup became the daily sign of repeated, conscious care, no longer cold and empty, but warm and shared. The unexpected twists, the stagecoach hook, the discovery of the 1871 map, Rook's sudden turning against his boss, and the final, beautiful twist of the flood, destroying Silas's evidence while validating the claim, had given the story its consistent, rising structure. The final lesson imprinted on the land and the people was that a person's value is not measured by rumor or wealth, but by their courage, integrity, and the willingness to fight for justice. And that love, in the Wild West, is not about possession, but about choosing each other anew, every single day. The concluding image of their journey was simple and perfect. The next morning, the sun poured molten gold onto the banks of Hart's Bend, where the creek flowed freely and strongly. Eliza and Cole walked side by side, leading the small Jersey cow out to the water's edge. Eliza knelt effortlessly beside Daisy, positioning the wooden bucket. Her hands moved with practiced confidence, the rhythmic pressure and release sending twin streams of milk hissing cleanly into the pail. She was no longer the novice, but the master of this small, immediate survival skill. She looked up at Cole, her face radiant with the joy of competence and connection. "The hard taskmaster taught me well," she smiled, a playful light in her eyes. Cole leaned down, his voice dropping to a low, warm murmur. The same voice that had calmed her fear in the barn. "I'll teach you everything," Cole whispered, a reference to their first moment of true connection. His meaning now expanded to include the entire, shared future. "And I'll also learn everything from you, Eliza." The wide, hopeful future lay before them, built not on luck, but on the enduring strength of a chosen partnership, and the honest, hard-won truth of the land. Thank you for listening to this story. Please let us know where you are listening from in the comments so we can all connect and share our thoughts. And be sure to subscribe to the Wild West Night channel, like the video, and press the hype button to help this story reach more listeners.